Hey everyone, great to see you. And today we're going to talk about transforming innovation obstacles to opportunities. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live. I'm so glad that you're here with me. I'm Mazor, Kario, Innovation and Value Creation Expert, and I'll be your host. And today with me, I have Thomas Poedenphant. I was good with that. Founder of Blue Spaze. Great to see you, Thomas. I'm so happy.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And we're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're much invited to join the discussion and ask questions. We'd love to see what you're thinking. So let's start. Most leaders are not satisfied with their innovation results. How could companies innovate better? What are the main blockers for innovation?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of things that is blocking companies. I think from my perspective and my background as well, I think sometimes it's a legacy. It's the way we operate. I think we are. I know in our business we talk a lot about the red and green mindset. Red and blue mindset, and really the red it's what I would classify as we just trying to become better at what we're doing. So it's all about doing one or two things, and we're just trying to make it better. I think something what we forget is in the blue mindset, what we're thinking about. Where's the future going? What are the new opportunities? Do we need to think about a different model? And I think sometimes what you find it comes back to it's what we call organization inertia, but also I think management it's kind of holding it back, and it's because we don't know what opportunities are. We don't understand our customers well enough, and by not really exploring or having a setup that allows you to it just puts you at the back burner in the sense that we don't explore the right opportunities at the right time. So good example is if you're looking at the whole banking market, we've got all the traditional banks and they've done what they're doing extremely well. But if you think about their customer base, they still keep looking at the same customers they had for the past 30, 40 years. But we now have a whole new generation set coming out, and they do banking completely different, And we're talking about, I think in the UK alone, it's almost like a £2 billion market, which they're completely ignoring because they don't know what to do with it. Because they don't really care if you call it Barclays or HSBC. Yeah. They like the challenger banks because they provide something that they need. They just need to have access to an account online. I don't really care what it's called, And these are the things that we need to be much more wary of. But you don't really find that in companies. But I think we need to be careful because, of course, some of them they are trying to take step forward. So I do see it in financial services where they're trying to team up with like the likes of fintechs, etc., where they're trying to bring in new technology. But sometimes also because you have that legacy that we need to own everything. That means you try to invent you out of it, but you don't always create the right platform, you don't create the right technology. So I think there's a lot of blockers, but I think for me a lot of it really comes down to the structure of your organization, and I think the leadership, because I think you need to recognize that we need to push the boundaries all the time, and that's a quite hard pill to swallow sometimes because you're upsetting a status quo, which not a lot of companies are interested in. Plus people become personal about it. Because I have built my career, I spent 25 years in this organization, I now have this top job, etc. I need to be seen as the one coming out with the ideas, and so I think we're missing a very golden opportunity in terms of how do we harness the power across our whole organization in terms of our people. It could even be through the entire ecosystem. So how do you work with your vendors? How do you work with your customers to really bring the right ideas to market?
Yeah, I think that you see many companies working in autopilot, and since they say, okay, it's working right now, why should we change? Which is a very good question. And most people will not consider it might change in the future as something that is threatening them, for surely not right now. But in order to succeed in the future, you need to start now, because in 20 years from now, 5 years or 10 years from now, and we see it right now, that things are really changing. And leaders, I think they are so used to doing what they're doing so well. They don't want to do anything different because they are successful in their career, in their leadership, and in their company. So in all layers. And they say, okay, why should we change? What would you answer them if they ask you that?
I think we need to, if we go back a little bit, and I was just thinking because I've been talking because as part of my career as well, I teach on an MBA, and actually we were talking about it last week. If you think about a lot of so I think a lot of it goes back to our whole educational system as well. We bring, so actually if you look at the stats, kids by the time they enter the first school year, they got a creativity rate of about 95%. By the time they're 10, it's reduced to 50%, right? And by the time they leave school, their creativity is about 2%. Because the way we educate, and it's the same you see in organization, you don't have the freedom to do things. And what we find is, because we like to tell people what to do, we look about, so how do we optimize process? How do we do things better? And back to the teaching, if you're looking at management books, a lot of them, they talk about how do I create a competitive advantage? But that's in terms of, that could be on your price point, it could be having better products, but it doesn't really tell you about how do you disrupt the market. We don't talk about innovation. It's really about just becoming better what we're already doing.
Yeah.
So I think it's the whole educational system is not geared towards, how do we get people to a point in time where we start thinking ahead? That is actually okay to disrupt an industry. And don't get me wrong, there are companies out there, because you just need to look at the likes of Zoom and Amazon and Canva, etc. Companies who just had models in place at the right time. But again, they've been focusing on looking into the future and what could drive the market. But you take the established companies that just don't do it. It really comes back to, I don't think they always know where to start, how to do it, and it comes back to not having the right structure in place. I think it's probably also doubting whether do I have the right people and do I have the right skill sets in place. But we sometimes feel that we have to own everything. We have to do everything in-house. I'm a firm believer that you've got to build an ecosystem. You've got to partner with the right companies, because if you think about it, no one come up with a great idea. People come up with great ideas because we build on an initial idea, but we do it because we take feedback, we validate the learning, but you've got to have those inputs coming from all different streams. And that's why I say, when we're looking at organizations, a lot of companies I work for in my career, everything comes from top down. Well, I say, well, hang on, but people working, let's say, frontline, working directly with customers every day, how do we capture that information, and how do we allow these people to actually bring ideas to life? Why would we have to go through a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and governance to actually get something approved, as opposed to, you can actually introduce those ideas into market and say you just run your own small experiments. But I think it's a cultural change that needs to happen in a lot of those established organizations.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about the education system is related to what I saw. Did you see the talk between Wall Street Journal and Elon Musk? He asked him, what do you think is going on with today's companies? And he said that there are too many MBAs leading companies. Did you see that? And it's connected to how do we see education and what is preparing people for the business world. Yeah. And I think that till now, in many cases, you need to understand business, you need to understand how do you create value and money, but the rules might change faster than we think, and they might be different than what you learned in school. And it could be in junior high, and it could be in your MBA, because what they're teaching is not always relevant. And people who are teaching in universities, even in like very established universities, are not always coming from the industry itself. They know how to do research, and then when they prepare for something that was relevant maybe 5 or 10 years ago. And we see right now that everything might change so fast, and till now it's changed fast, and now it's even faster, I would say.
It changes very, very fast. Just if you look at, and I think that was part of the mindset, we always like to create strategies for the next 5 years. Then you create a business model that will support that, and then we implement it, and we won't touch it for 5 years. And I think you can't do that, because the market around you, or the whole environment will so fast. How do you follow up with that? But at the same token, if you're looking at people's skill sets, before, when we upskill people, a skill set would last for about 9 years. Today we're talking 4.5 years,
Even less, I think.
And even if you're looking at our kids' generation, we do estimate that over 50% of the jobs that they're going to do once they leave school doesn't even exist today. So we need to turn flip the coin on this one and start looking differently, because I think we need to prepare in a completely different sense. But but I like your comment you made about Elon Musk, and I heard that one before. But I spent 4 years with Credit Suisse, and when you're working in those big established banks, they're very risk averse, and that kind of kills your innovation and organization. Everything has to be documented. I normally had my wife always said, "Are you still working on the same PowerPoint presentation?" No, it's a new one, because every time you had an idea, you asked, put it down in a PowerPoint presentation and present it back to the management team. And so you find you're spending all your time creating documents that's just telling a narrative. But what you don't really do is trying to bring ideas to life. You don't really try to get them behind it. And if you think about how we look at information, we interpret things so very differently, but it might be a bit harsh coming across like this, but if you think about in the world we live in, we talk so much about, we need our freedom, and you need freedom to be creative.
Sure.
But the minute you walk into an organization, we take that freedom, we throw it away, because it's almost like a dictatorship, because you got your hierarchy. We have roles and responsibilities. We know how decision making is made. So the thing is, I go in and I protect my job because I'm relying on a paycheck. But what you don't, so I don't want to challenge the status quo. And if you're in that situation, you're actually killing innovation, because where are new ideas going to come from? Because I'm not going to take the risk. And I think one of the things that I learned in financial services, everybody has to agree. If you did like a transformation program, every single delivery has to be signed off by everyone, because nobody wanted to be the single point of failure. So what we're doing is everything is just taking a lot longer. So you can't pivot as quickly as you like, because nobody's going to take that risk. So you become more protective of doing what we're doing today, and maybe make a few incremental changes, but doing a big bang kind of innovation kind of input is not going to happen. It's and I think that's a set of behavior that really has to change if you want to be more innovative.
I think that what currently most companies are doing is dealing with the known. They have a set of rules and data that they know is for them true, but sometimes it's true only for now, and there are so many more uncertainties going into this equation, I would say. And to handle uncertainties, you cannot work from a very solid structure. You need different way of solving things, and that's one of the obstacles for them. And when you're thinking that's the only main thing that where a small startup could outcompete a big company, with the fact that they are so fast and doing things so flexibly and not rigidly. And
you're absolutely right. I think with the small firms, first of all, you're not bogged down by a structure. I think they don't go in and say, I have my entire business model in place. They might go in with an idea is going to solve a problem, but I think they grow over time, and you're going to see a business model falling into play. But it also allows them to pivot very, very quickly. I think you just need to look at it. If you think about mass production, you go in and you create something that's optimized. But if you look at the lean model that Toyota introduced, they didn't have, because post Second World War, they didn't have the funding to create those big manufacturing sites like you had in the US. So they had to be more clever. But what they actually did, they could actually be just as efficient as the American producers around in the car industry, but they really just went in and say, we don't just produce the frame, and then we produce the doors, and then we assemble it all, blah, blah, because the thing is, if you realize after you produced 100, we made a mistake, you've got to have to stop the entire production and go back and start all over again. With the Toyota model, you just kind of created one car at a time, but if something went wrong, you will pick it up very quickly. And I think that's the mentality you need to have. You need to see it before it actually happens. If you're too late in the process, it can be quite daunting in any organization. But I think the most fundamental part is, and I like to quote Steve Jobs, because I'm a big fan of what he's done with Apple, because a simple thing you always done is, I'm going to have to understand my customers, and then be working backwards. And 20, 30 years later, there's still a lot of organization doesn't think like this, because we have a mindset to say, I know the industry, I've been here for 20 years or 30 years, but the world changes all the time. And can you honestly be self-reflective and admit to the fact that, have you actually followed the trend, or do you just keep doing the same? So I grew up with a professor who taught me and said, you've got two types of people, one who's got 10 years of experience and one who's got 1 year repeated 10 times. And I think we need to really look at that in any organization, because if you've got someone with 10 years experience, they're curious, they want to understand, they want to change, but also these are the type of people that would leave your organization if things are not moving. So sometimes we end up losing the very good people that could be your kind of your innovation engine in an organization.
Yeah, I think that Jeff Bezos said it's like the first day impression. I don't remember exactly what he said, but you're always wondering, curious, like in the first day. So it's like you're always open to new opportunities, and it's not like you want to ask questions more than you want to answer them. And once you have this mentality, you're more prone to do things different. And I totally understand. Like in general, people don't like to change. They don't like to change. They want to know. They don't want not to know, right? So they want to think that they know everything and they're doing everything right, and they don't need to change. And it's the same for employees and leaders. It's just the same. And once this company, this entity is very successful right now, it's just makes sense, right? So we know the industry, we know our suppliers, we know everything. We don't need to go to this end customers, because it's just the same. And even if something changes in their end customers' needs, they will not know, because for them it's like, what they wanted 10 years ago, it's just the same right now, right?
No, you're absolutely spot on. I think you're spot on. And I think, just to pick up on your point on data, I think, because yes, we need data, and I think we are in a situation today where we work with real-time data. And I think we need to use that to make decisions. I think my concern, I sometimes have with data, is how we interpret, because I have seen so many business cases in my life, and I create a lot of business cases, but we manipulate the data to make it fit our agenda, to make fit what we think is the right way. But what data doesn't tell you is, data can give you some patterns, but sometimes it doesn't tell you the behavior. But that means you've got to get out the house, you've got to go out and talk to people, you've got to talk to your customers. The minute you hide behind the desk, behind the screen, and never leave the building, you only have one side of the story, and that's not going to help you in your innovation journey, because you've got to be out there. And that's what we teach a lot to our customers, is because I normally look and I present a simple graph to them. I said, one is, and that's the traditional one, we have a problem we need to solve. Then we look at the data, and then we create a business case. And business case for me tend to be based on assumptions and based on emotions. And the assumption is fine to have, but you've got to have to test them. Assumption is just an assumption until we actually tested it. So it's like an onion. You don't need to peel a layer off all the time to reduce uncertainty. But it's not going to give you a picture overnight, but you've got to have a bit of patience with that. But what happens then, and then you've got a set of management team that's going to buy into that idea, and they're going to mobilize a team. You've got to build that idea, and then you've got to introduce it to market. And that's when you start getting feedback. And then it's very late in the process. So you think about the time and the money you invested into this, as opposed to if we do take smaller steps, where we actually kind of start creating. We start with simply something we call a prototype. So it's just we need to validate an idea, but we need to think about what data we're going to collect. So there's a lot of methods you can use to collect data to understand it, but there's also ways you've got to be conscious that the data you get, how valid is it? Because people might say yes to the idea just because, it's brilliant, but do they actually have skin in the game? So we really need to dig deep, and that's why we need to engage with customers. But I think that for me is a missing link, because what you do, if you run those small experiments and we can reduce uncertainty very, very quickly, you get to a point where you can make informed decision. And you think about how less you have invested into a program like this to get the answers that you need, because we're getting feedback up front, not like 12 months later.
Sure. And I think it's connected to Julian joined us and he said that people on the front line, that is the key for to opportunities. And I think it's connected to the fact that they know the clients better than any other people in the company. And if you talk to them and to your clients, you could understand so much more than just seeing the data. So you see people, you see churn, you see people leaving, but why? Where are they going? What are their needs that are not unmet here? What do you think right now? What do they feel? If you understand that, you have the option to understand why and to interpret the data. Yeah. And then you can have more informed decision on what is the experiment you're going to try even before you get the results of the experiment, right?
No, you're absolutely right. It's always been one of my key principles when I worked with companies, because my background sits in change management and transformation, and one of the key principles I always had used when I've talked to customers is, first of all, I need to have a mirror team, first of all, because that's where your knowledge transfer sits. So that means I need people who actually knows the business inside out. That means people who lives and breathes those processes every single day, who works with their customers. And two, I normally get them to identify who's your key people in your organization and where are they on this particular project, because these are the people you want to be able to shape the future of that organization, because that's in their nature. If you don't allow them and empower them to be part of that, they're going to leave, because they're going to go next door, because they believe so much in themselves they can always find a job next door. And you end up with what we call dead wood. And that's not what's going to take your company forward. It's going to keep you afloat, absolutely keep the engine running. But you've got to have that empowerment. So I think for me, let's go back to what we talked about before. People at the front end, for example, talking to customers. Why would we need to go through a very rigorous sign-off process just to test some new ideas? Why don't we just let them run those small experiments? Come back and tell management and say, this is what we've learned. This is where we see improvements. This is what the things that we learned that didn't work, but we're taking upfront feedback. It is not a risk to the business necessarily. But you got to
they see it.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to run that. And just to give you an example, I worked with a company a couple of years ago where we introduced this kind of a concept, because we understood that because it was in a nuclear power station. So first of all, you just can't hire anyone. You need very specific skills. But at the same time, how do we keep these people?
And you don't want to fail, and you don't want to make any mistakes, right?
Absolutely. And at the same time, how do we keep those people motivated? Because sometimes they might be in remote locations where their whole family life is, but we need to stay. The minute they decide to leave out of that area, we leave a big gap in the organization. So we found ways where we can involve them. So we work a lot around what we call communities of practice, where it becomes more like self-sufficient teams in an organization, who kind of like have the freedom to experiment and to test and to bring up new ideas. But it becomes a learning journey, because I'm a firm believer that we should not define an end state. We should define a direction, because it allows you to pivot once we learn more and more. But we introduced a concept that was quite simple, actually, where we call it red, amber, green ideas. But the red ideas could be something that might take years and cost millions. So we need to evaluate and do more research, absolutely fine. But the green ideas were things where you didn't have to ask permission. So it could be anything from how do we conduct more productive meetings to, we're going to look at this particular process and look at how we can improve that. But what you would do, we would create a platform where they could promote those ideas. And then people say, oh, brilliant, I might try this in my team as well. So we kind of put the ideas out there and people could pick them up. And then you get people to talk and discuss and share their experiences. But at the same token, we gamified it. So it's interesting to see, which ideas are going to work or not. But it gave people the freedom to actually feel that we're contributing to our organization. We have an influence, and actually people are listening to us. And now we gave them a voice, and that was really important.
Yeah, I think that in general, many companies see these yes men as they're leading the company, right? And these people who want to say this status quo, these rebels, is like, they're making trouble. Like we're not sure that they're good for our institution in general. Yeah. And once you engage these people and use their creativity and initiative and the power of creation, is something that might be very valuable for your company. And if you give them the place to do it, it's so important.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're now like in the middle of the COVID crisis. And there are so many new obstacles out there. So what are the challenges that innovation leaders are facing nowadays?
Well, I think I think I still think you have some of the same experiences because it's just a disruption to market, and it can happen. We just need to think about the economic crisis we had back in 2008 onwards. It's these things are happening. What was interesting is I think what it showed us this time around how vulnerable organizations are and fragile, because some of them suddenly realized when we went into lockdown, and if you didn't have an online business, you really struggled. And that also meant that they started to realize my cash flow is not good enough. That means I might stay afloat for 3 months, maybe 6 months, and that's it. And that kind of kills everything in terms of innovation, because now we go straight into survival mode. And that's what I found a lot in my conversation with companies last year is we like to hear about ideas, but they just didn't have the energy and the focus to actually put their efforts into this. It was more about, how do I save my organization? And but also I might have to make people redundant. But how do I still keep what I have left afloat? I think situations are starting to change now, because I think we now adapted to new ways of working. We have accepted the fact that business can't stand still just because we have COVID, and we still don't know how long it's going to take. But it doesn't mean I can't do my business, because I think what is interesting, and you mentioned it earlier, people don't necessarily like to change. But I think 2020 just showed that you can't force it sometimes upon people.
You don't have any choice. So,
exactly. And they adopted and adapted those changes very, very quickly. So it can be done, and maybe that's a testament to say, do we still have to have the same arguments where we're dealing with all this resistance, where people don't want to change because we want to stick to the old ways of doing it? But I think the environment seems to be more positive these days. We start to accept the fact that we have to move on. We have to start doing things differently. But also, because I'm working with and advising a company at the moment who's looking at it's a software platform for underwriting of insurances. But the whole question started with, we got so many different features we want to introduce, but we can't do it in the time we got available, and we don't have the team. So they first thought, we need to bring a new team, and that's probably what you have done in good times. But we get them to think differently and say, well, but do your customers need all these features? Would they actually pay for it? Can they see the benefits the way you see them? And now we got them to change and think about it differently. So now they're starting to think more like a product company and be testing product ideas. But rather than building, we actually just prototyping it. So we're creating small visualization of ideas that they can then test with customers. But the challenge they've had is they're afraid to go out and talk to customers, because in their minds they say, companies then will think of us like, oh, we don't know what we're doing, we're just learning. And said, no, we're not learning. What we're actually doing is we're trying to develop it with you. We make sure we introduce something that is relevant for you, but we need your feedback. So I think that's a conversation that needs to change. But in the UK, and we talked about that earlier, I think we got Brexit on top of that. And it just shows that you can't introduce a change like 7 days before New Year and then expect everybody to be ready on the 1st of January. We also need time, But I think the minute you start to incorporate that into your organization and have the right setup, that becomes an ongoing conversation. So I think we need to move away from thinking change is only happening when we're doing a project. I think change has to be incorporated into something we do every single day. So change has to happen, and that's why I think we need all layers of an organization involved in innovation, because change can come from all different shapes and angles and everything, and you just got to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and everybody could take part. And what you're saying about COVID and the change, I think what happened is like a mental process. At the beginning, most people thought, okay, it's going to come back. We'll just wait here, do nothing, freeze, and then it will just pass. And it took time for them to say goodbye to what it was, or that they believe it was. And then it took time for them to think, okay, now we should do something else, or we should try something else, because we understand that it's here at least for the next few months or maybe a year. and we cannot wait so long. And it was like a emotional process. We have 2 more comments. One from Sankap. He said they started to noticing there is a rise in hire and fire after COVID, and it's what you said. Like they know that they cannot have the same people, but they're trying to have other people in their organizations there. So both sides could be in the same company, or some companies firing and some of them growing and hiring.
Yeah.
So
you know what? Just to answer that one, because as I said, with a background in transformation, every time there's been a crisis in the market, some companies have been more at the forefront. They always see this as opportunities, and that's the kind of opportunities I always like to work on. But they're seen as an opportunity to clean up their house, get their house in order, maybe restructure, and maybe get a more lean organization in. But it also given them a window of opportunity to say, what do we want to stand for in the future? What type of skills and experience do we need? And that helps them identify the right people in the organization who could take them forward, and then get rid of what we call deadwood. And that's not. And I think some companies they're grabbing these opportunities. But I think we need to be. I think part of the conversation as well around COVID has been very negative, because we're focusing on industries that's been hard hit. So like the whole hospitality and entertainment business, etc. Shops, the high street, etc. I think we're forgetting sometimes it hasn't all been negative, because there has actually been a lot of organizations in the background who just had the right organization. If you look at Amazon, they hired over 100,000 people because the online business just went through the roof. We had Zoom, who went from a market capitalization with 20 million in 19 to 160 million towards the end of last year. I think they're actually down to 100 billion now, but it's still, they just had the right platform at the right time. If we look at supermarkets in the UK, I'll take Sainsbury's. They hired 11,000 people. Tesco's hired 16,000 people because the online business has just literally exploded. So I think we need to recognize that some industries are doing extremely well. And maybe it is just the fact that some industries need to look at themselves and say, how do I now provide my service differently? Or do we just complete the industry we're in and we deliver our service completely different?
Yeah.
I think we like to stick to the fact that this is what we always done. It has to stay like this. We need to accept the fact that things are going to change now.
I think that the 2 examples you gave are like 2 very exceptional examples. One is Amazon. Not many big companies like Amazon changing all the time, innovating all the time, changing what they are and going into health right now. There are not many of them, and the big companies are getting much bigger, but the small companies are like being cut, and this is one example. And the second one is Zoom. This is pure luck, not more than that, right? Because when you see always when I see their interface, I say to myself, this is a proof there is no need for design in the world, because it's like, how is it so successful? I come from design and innovation, so what's going on? But when you have a new need and you are the one to fill in this gap, which is needed in the market, you're successful. But you see many companies that are smaller or less advanced, or they didn't have the right thing in the right time, they're losing in the competition. And it's really important to understand that they're like the big ones are so much bigger. And I think it's even the way we see societies and the way we see who is winning in this game. Another thing that you said about how can we change is Julian joined us again, and he said that change should be in the organization's DNA. And I totally agree. I think it's really important. So it was so fast and we're almost done. So I have only one question from, I guess, about 10 more that I have. So I'll ask you, what's your number 1 tip for innovation leaders?
I think the most fundamental for me, and it goes back to what Julia just said about DNA. I'm a firm believer, because the way we look at innovation is a human-centered approach. I think your DNA starts with your people. It starts with it's the behavior we need to think about. Because yes, we need process, we need structure, we need to, leadership, etc. But from my experience, you can have the best setup, best process, but if you don't encourage your people to do it, it's not going to happen. I think you really need to start and looking inwards, and I think not just inwards, but at your ecosystem. you've got to have to build the right set of behaviors to drive this new way of conquering the world. And so I'm a firm believer that it starts with your people. That's why I'm quite passionate about it. If people empowerment really comes with giving them the freedom, and it's okay. And I don't like to talk about failure. I like to talk about validated learning, because it's like kids. You've got to have to fall over. You've got to hurt your knee to understand that it really hurts a lot. So I won't do it again. But without that experience, I'm never going to learn. So I think one of the fundamental thing is that you've got to be open, and you've got to listen to people, and you've got to be ready to experiment.
Right. I totally agree with what you're saying. So if people want to find out more and contact you, where should they go?
Well, they can always visit our website, which is bluespace.com. I'm quite active now on LinkedIn, and I always like to network with people. So I always like to go into this conversation. Well, you know that.
Yeah.
I really reach out to people as well, but I'm quite passionate about this because I really think it's the way forward, and I really think that it's a great opportunity for companies to look differently. But or you can email me at thomas@bluespace.com if you want to. But I'm always up for a discussion around innovation.
Sure, it's Blue Space with Z.
That's a good point. You mentioned that.
Yeah. So I want to thank everyone here, and I want to thank the Julian and Sankap who joined us and asked questions. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining me and joining Thomas. I'll see you next time, and you're much invited to go and see invincibleinnovation.com if you want to know more about what I do. So have a great day and a great week. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.